Excellent. All right. Good evening, everybody. My name is Annie Tillman. I'm the Adult Program Coordinator at the Schaumburg Township District Library. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Tonight we have Doug Feldmann and Bob Thomas to talk about A View from Two Benches. So we'll hold all of the questions until the end. If you'd like to put those in the chat box or the Q&A, I'll come back on at the end of the program to ask those aloud. Without further ado, I'd like to pass it off to Doug and Bob.
Go ahead, Doug. Am I kicking off, so to speak?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
All right. Well, hi, everybody. Thanks. Thanks for joining us. And thank you, Annie, for having us. I'm under no illusion that you came to hear me talk. I'm going to turn it over to Bob in a few moments, and I'm sure he'll give you a bunch of bears and maybe even courtroom stories. We'll see. But if you'll indulge me for a few minutes, I just want to tell you a little bit about how and why I went about writing this book. First of all, we all should have bought Zoom stock, I think, about 9 months ago, right? All this Zooming, we are getting that squared away. I teach at Northern Kentucky University, which is just right across the river from Cincinnati. And I'm in my office right now, you can probably tell. And we Zoom a lot, but wish I could be there with you in person. I'm from Algonquin, just down the road. And just grew up a Bears fan, like many of you. And Bob's story was so compelling. I approached him. I'll get more into that in a little bit. And he was willing to take this on with me. I'm going to share just a few PowerPoint slides. That's always good news to my students when I say just a few PowerPoint slides, just to kind of accentuate some things as I go along. And let me start with this. Everybody see that okay? I can't see all of you, but I'll trust that you can. 1975, I'm going to go back to that because it was a new beginning for the Bears. It was Bob's rookie year with the Bears, and he was one of 17 rookies on the team that year. There were also 17 new veterans, so 34 out of the Bears' 45 players on their opening week roster in 1975 were brand new. That's just over 75%. If these guys look familiar, the guy on the left probably does. Bob knows all three of these men, but George Halas, Jim Finks, and Jack Pardee. Jack Pardee was the new coach in 1975. Jim Finks was the new general manager, and again, 75% of the players were new. So George Halas is the owner. He wasn't just pressing the reset button; he was pounding it into submission. But because 1975, everything was so new, it was a great year for someone to start following the team, start being a Bears fan. And that's when I started. I was 5 years old. Now, when I come back to the Schaumburg, Algonquin area, I'm disappointed to see that the White Hen pantries are no longer around. I understand they're all 7-Elevens now. Well, when I was little, I'd tag along with my mom. We'd go into White Hen if we needed a jug of milk or something, and she'd always indulge me and give me a pack of football cards or baseball cards. And that's how I learned about the players and the teams. I was very fortunate, but my father played professional baseball. He played with the Cubs and the White Sox in the minor leagues before settling into a teaching career in Elgin. And my mom was a teacher as well. But I was fortunate to be home with her during my kindergarten year. And that's how I learned about the players. She sat down with me and looked at the cards with me. And I was fascinated by all the colors of the cards. There's a couple familiar faces right there. And not just looking at the pictures of the players, but reading about their personal information on the back, their statistics, where they came from, where they went to college. That was all fascinating to me. And that's you can guess who this is right here. You have your choice of what is most hideous in this picture. That's me when I'm 6 years old, sitting at my parents' counter there in Algonquin in our house. Most hideous might be my glasses. I don't know, my haircut, even though I'm maybe just jealous. That semblance of a carpet, the cabinets. But anyway, I'm sitting there having a good time. That's 1976, 6 years old. And my trusty cat Tiger sitting there on the counter as well, thumbing through those cards. And then that's how I started. But it really created a pathology because from the time I was in kindergarten until I left Jacobs High School in 1988, I missed one Bears game, one, either radio or TV. It was fall of '83, and I was on a church retreat, and the teachers and the nuns told us we would have no connection to the outside world. And, I was concerned because, I wasn't thinking about, how I was going to develop a closer relationship with God or anything. I was wondering, what was I going to do about the Bears game? That was my biggest concern. So that's been a very self-indulgent talk so far, but I have a point, and my point is this, that I'll leave the screen now. When we're little kids, or even when we're teenagers, and we have heroes in popular culture, whether they're sports stars or movie stars or music stars, whatever, they're heroes, but they're also monolithic. They're caricatures in a way. And what I mean is, we don't necessarily see them as real people with real person problems or challenges, or else we don't care if they have real person problems or challenges. I'll give you an example. 1984, I may have been sitting there watching a Bears game, and it wouldn't have mattered to me if I knew that Bob had been up all week every night with a screaming, crying new baby and didn't get any sleep. I needed him to make kicks for the Bears. That was his job in my life. That's how those things go when you're little. Another quick example, if you can relate to this one, I hope. The summer before my senior year at Jacobs, on the 4th of July, I was supposed to go up to Alpine Valley in Wisconsin and see the bands Rat and Poison in concert, if you remember them. Well, 3 days before the show, Bret Michaels got a sore throat and they canceled the show. And I'm sitting there thinking, that can't happen. Bret Michaels can't get a sore throat. He has one job to do in my life, and that's be the lead singer of Poison. So, but then what happens to us? We grow up, and when we grow up, life gets complicated, right? We get older, and life just dumps stuff into our laps that we're forced to deal with. Sometimes very hurtful, challenging stuff. Problems with our families, our relationships, our jobs, our finances, our health. So as I got older and I experienced the joys and challenges of adulthood, I started to wonder, what happened to all those childhood heroes I had? What happened to them in their afterlife, so to speak, after sports? So fast forward to December 2016, around Christmas time, I approached Bob about the possibility of this project. Now, at that time, I knew as much about Bob as maybe you do, that he was a great kicker for the Bears and other teams for over 10 years in the NFL, and had risen to the top of the legal ranks during and after that career. But if you've ever worked on a book project, or if you've ever just been involved in an intensive research project, you know that as you unpack the subject, you learn more about it than you could have ever dreamt. And I was very fortunate. Bob and his family opened up their lives to me, and I learned that it wasn't always a bed of roses for Bob. It wasn't always easy. In the NFL, he was cut 7 times by 6 different teams, twice by the Bears. You may be looking at the only man in the history of the world who was fired twice by Mike Ditka. But Coach Ditka remains one of his greatest supporters. You might have noticed he wrote the foreword for the book. After he landed on the Supreme Court, was elected to the Supreme Court, Bob was subject to a malicious series of newspaper articles that accused him of judicial misconduct, which is tantamount to a felony, that he was trading votes on a disciplinary matter for political favors in another election. Completely unfounded, was proven untrue in court, but I'm sure he'll tell you wore on him for over 3 years of his life. When Bob and I first met, we discovered that we each have children who were adopted, and really only an adoptive parent can understand the joys and challenges that go along with that experience. So I found, as I suspected, but I found even more deeply than I suspected, that Bob is a real person, with goals outside of law and loves outside of law and football. So I began to probe him and ask, what made him tick in terms of, how did he get over those tough times in his life? And the underpinning throughout the whole story is faith, his faith. Now, faith is an extremely ambiguous term, or it can be. I'm in teacher education. I'm a teacher education professor, meaning I train people to become high school and middle school teachers. And even though I teach at a public university, I tell my students that don't be afraid to let your faith guide your teaching. Even if it's a secular faith, if you just believe in your morals, believe in yourself, that's a faith. And that was the stabilizer I've noticed in Bob's life all the way, that like a stabilizer on an airplane, not let yourself get too low in the low times, not too high in the good times, because you know you'll come back down. So I was very impressed with that. Just another couple minutes here. I want to share a couple more things. Back to the PowerPoint. Get my screen share back up. I don't know if you recognize this guy here. Go at the top of the hill. It's Walter Payton, of course, one of that great rookie crop from 1975 the Bears were able to harvest. And Walter, he would, going back to Bob's idea of faith, Bob knew Walter as well as anyone on the Bears. They were teammates for about 10 years. And Walter, you see him running up the hill here with a teammate behind him. He did this when he was training in his small town in Mississippi when he grew up. He found another similar hill when he found a home in the suburbs, not far from Schaumburg. And the man you see coming up the hill behind him is Dennis Gentry. I don't know if you remember Dennis Gentry from the Bears of the 80s. Keep in mind, Dennis is about 5 or 6 years younger than Walter, but Walter's still surmounting the hill at a quicker pace. And athletes from all over the world in different sports would come and try to train with Walter. And if you remember Walter, which I'm sure many of you do, we not only marveled at his great runs with the football, but his physique was basically unseen. We all thought that Walter would play until he was about 75 and probably live to be 200. But unfortunately, we know, the terrible fate that befell him. He contracted the rare liver disease and died at 45. And in terms of faith, Bob, in one story, related to me that, if someone larger than life, like Walter Payton, succumbs to such a fate, it's a wake-up call for all of us. And what do we have to believe in? Who do we have to believe in? That's where faith comes into our lives as well. But it was a very powerful friendship they had. You see Bob planting a kiss there on Walter's helmet after Walter broke the career rushing record at Soldier Field in 1984. In another story, Bob told me when they'd be on a plane to an away game, and the plane would encounter turbulence, maybe from a storm, and Bob would say to himself, "Well, God's not going to bring down this plane. Walter Payton's on board." But again, we think about that faith that we're all destined to one day, and that faith that carries us along the way through the bumps in the road. And that's what this book is about, and that's what Bob's friendships on the Bears were all about, it seems to me. Last thing, I'll close with this, and I'll turn it over to Bob. I followed in Bob's footsteps in a little way. I was a punter at NIU, but only in the most literal sense. I was a backup punter, very important job on a football team. But even so, I think Coach Pettibone would have sent in like 9 or 10 other guys before me to punt if the punter got hurt. But anyway, I played baseball at Northern as well. We had an assistant coach there who was a former Marine. His name was Vern Hasty. And as a former Marine, Coach Hasty had all these axioms or proverbs he liked to throw out to us all the time. And I remember we were at one practice. I was at third base fielding ground ball after ground ball after ground ball. I must have taken 100 ground balls at baseball practice at Northern that day. And while we were doing that, just a routine play, ground ball, throw to first over and over again, Coach Hasty said this phrase that always stuck with me. He said, "Do the ordinary things extraordinarily well." He just kept saying it over and over. Do the ordinary things extraordinarily well. And it's a phrase I've taken with me through my life, and I tried to live by, but it really came back to me as I was getting to know Bob. We must have talked, Bob, once a week for a couple of years or more. Sometimes we were putting the book together. And he's always gracious with his time. But if Bob would call me, it wouldn't be like, "Oh, Doug, I got to tell you about this great kick I made back in 1979. Or well, let me tell you about this complex court case we had to decide once." It was always something like, "Oh, Maggie and I found this great new restaurant in Naperville." Or "Let me tell you the cute thing that my granddaughter did last week." It's those those ordinary things, I hate to call them ordinary, but in the sense of this phrase, you know, the being a good father, being a good husband, a good community member, a good son. Those are the things I could tell Bob really takes pride in, because he knows those are the things that carry one truly through life, not the laurels of what you might achieve in one profession or another. So I'll close with showing you the people that Bob is especially proud of, his wonderful family. Again, they've been gracious to me as well. And just so pleased to get to know them. And hope you'll get to know them if you pick up the book. And by the way, before I turn it over to Bob, I want to mention, as your gift for being with us tonight, only Bob and I have this secret code that will give you 30% off the book, which I'll share with you at the end. If you care to order, you'll get a special discount tonight. So you don't have to order it tonight. I'll give you the code and you can use it whenever. So Bob, would you like to take it from there?
Sure. You know, just thinking as you're talking, I'm thinking back to when I first met Doug. My secretary came in and she said, "There's a guy out there by the name of Doug Feldmann." My office, when I was on the Supreme Court, was in Wheaton, Illinois. And I said, "Well, who is Doug Feldmann?" He said, "I don't know." He said something about he wants to write your book. And so I said, "Well, show him in." And I knew he was very passionate. I knew he was certainly a Bear fan. I knew he was a Chicago guy. And I also knew that writing a book is not easy. I was told by somebody along the way who considered writing my book, he said, "You know, you have to stay focused, and it's a job. I mean, you're going to spend a lot of time with whoever writes your book and go through a lot of detail and a lot of revisions. And but there was something about Doug that I really liked. And I thought that if I was going to write a book, which, by the way, is a very humbling experience. I mean, to have someone come in and tell you that they want to write about your life, because, you know, it's your life. To you, it's somewhat commonplace. And to somebody that come in and said there's actually a story. In fact, I remember saying to Doug, "Well, will we get this published?" And he said, "Oh yeah, for sure, we'll get it published." And I thought, my only thought was, well, great, I'll have some glossy covers of a book to give to my grandkids. I've been really blessed. I have a great wife of 41 years. I have, as you can see in the picture, a lot of grandkids. I have 9 grandkids and 3 great children who all make some contribution to the book. But because of Doug, it became a really fun exercise. It really wasn't work. I look forward to talking to Doug and getting a chapter to read after he had finished the chapter. I mean, he obviously had the pedigree. He, you know, writing the Magnuson book and a number of baseball books. He certainly knew what he was doing, and I knew that from the beginning because I was just enthralled with the chapter about my dad and how he came here from Italy and how soccer played a role in me even being born, in light of the fact that he came over here and met my mom. And I read that with open eyes, and Doug in his research surprised me, and I knew more about the story at the end than I did going in than what I shared with him. He shared a lot about my dad being raised in Mussolini's Italy and being in this camp that was run by a military camp, and how it's a long story, but how my dad's brother escaped and then agreed to come back. And as a result of that, Mussolini let my dad and his sister come over to America. And I remember commenting to Doug, "Forget me. I mean, this is stuff that a movie is made out of, you know." So it was fun. And like I said, from the very beginning, I knew what kind of writer Doug was. He wasn't just somebody that was going to read a couple of Tribune or Sun-Times articles from 1975 or 1978 or whatever and write a book. He was going to do his research. So, and part of that research was delving into my thoughts. He's already, there's so much to talk about, and realize that, this is the story of my life. So there's not much I can talk about today that isn't in the book, but hopefully the little that I'll tell you, might prompt you to want to read it. He mentioned Walter Payton, and I missed out in the book chronicles how I missed out on 2 Super Bowls, the '85 Super Bowl with the Bears being the one that hurt the most. And then in '86, I actually was on the New York Giants and played in the first game and was injured prior to the first game and was on injured reserve as they went to and won the Super Bowl. But as I look back at '68 and look back at 12 years of playing in the NFL, really what I think about more is the relationships. And I think that comes out throughout the book. I had the opportunity to play 10 years with the greatest football player of all time, in my opinion, Walter Payton. Everybody saw what he did on Sunday. I saw what he did 7 days out of the week. It was just incredible. He could obviously run. He could block. What superstar blocked like him? None. He could catch the ball. Doug mentions punter. He could punt and did. And he could also kick. And I always was thankful that he chose not to, because he was a very good kicker. And we were very close friends coming in 1975. It was tough not to be a friend of Walter, but I think because of the longevity and us playing 10 years together, we had a special relationship and a special friendship. And when I was released the second time by Mike Ditka in 1985, I had my best year in 1984. And this story is certainly in the book, like the rest I'll probably talk about today or tonight. So I had my best year in '84. I was rated among the top 2 or 3 kickers in the National Football League. And probably I was never more convinced that I would be on a Chicago Bear team than 1985. And then 1985, coming home after the birth of my daughter and handing a cigar to Mike Ditka after working out in the equipment room during the off season and driving home, I'm listening to WBBM radio during the draft. And it said, well, with the 4th pick in the draft, the Bears draft Kevin Butler. And I honestly almost ran off the road. I remember where I was. I was on 88 and almost ran off the road. And I was waiting for the announcer to say that it was a mistake. How could this be? But it wasn't a mistake. And although Ditka at the conclusion said I wasn't beat out, the fact that there was a younger guy after I had played 10 years, another good kicker for the Bears, they went with the 4th round draft pick and Kevin Butler. The training camp was difficult because, I really felt as a result of the year that I would really have to be beat out, as Ditka said, and that did not happen. And Ditka admitted it didn't happen. And I remember walking into the locker room during the last cut, and Steve Kaiser, the special teams coach, is standing by the door, and he said, Mike wants to see you, and bring your playbook. Well, kickers don't have much of a playbook, but I had a little playbook that they wanted me to turn in. So I went upstairs to Ditka, and he fumbled with a pencil and an eraser. He never looked me in the eye. And he said, Bob, we're going with the younger guy. And as I already indicated, the younger guy was Kevin Butler. And then he said it wasn't fair and it wasn't just. And I thought, those were the same 2 words that were going through my mind. It wasn't fair and just that I had been with the Bears 10 years, and now on the eve of greatness, we had gone to the NFC Championship game in '84. We were pretty close, that I wasn't going to be on the team. But I was pretty broken up. I knew that this second cut by Mike Ditka was going to be the last. I wasn't going to be brought back, and there were a number of players that I had played with for a long time. So I ended up waiting upstairs, waiting for everyone to go to meetings, and because there would be time for goodbyes when I wasn't so broken up. So I had to waste time upstairs in the offices before I went down to the locker room and pick up my things. And I went down to the office of Kenny Valdesari, who his dad was the PR man for Notre Dame when I was there, generally recognized as one of the best PR men in the business, Roger Valdesari. And Kenny went to Notre Dame, and I go into Kenny's office, and he's crying. He was actually crying. And he said, "I want to tell you something." And he said, "I got here early this morning, being the PR man on the day of the last cuts, and the reporters wanting to know what happened. He was the first one to the door, or so he thought. When he got to the door of Hallis Hall, Walter Payton was standing there." And he said to Kenny, he said, "Did Bob make the team?" And Kenny said, "I can't tell you." And Payton said to him, "You just did." So I wait till about 9:15. The meeting's time was at 9 o'clock. I walked down into the locker room, and there, sitting in my locker, lockers in the NFL are big enough to sit in, sitting on top of my shoes was Walter Payton. I wasn't smart enough to realize, I guess, that if Walter was a little late for the meeting, that they might still consider playing him on Sunday. So, in my opinion, the greatest football player of all time grabs me by my wrist and walks me out the equipment room door. As I'm telling the story, just like when I told it to Doug, just like when I read it in the book, it comes back to me like it's happening all over again. Payton walks me out the door. We sit on these railroad ties outside of the equipment room door, and the greatest football player of all time buries my tear-soaked eyes in his chest and tells me what a privilege it was for him, greatest football player of all time, to play with me, this broken down kicker, for the last 10 years. And that was really servanthood. So when I look at that kind of relationship, when I look at that kind of friendship, Super Bowls, right? I mean, they play them every year, for a reason. They're great, but they play them every year. And I think back to that. And Doug had also mentioned faith, and I don't want to monopolize. I want to go back to Doug because he might have specific questions, and then certainly whoever's viewing might have some questions. But Doug also mentioned faith, and that involves Walter Payton. That's a big part of the story as well. Some of us attended a Bible study with the Bears, and Walter was kind of always on the periphery. He didn't come into the study, but after we walked out, he wanted to know about it. He wanted to know what was taught. In 1995, I guess, is that when he died, Doug? 95. Right. 1995, I was coaching soccer for Wheaton Academy, and we were downstate playing a game, and Walter had died. It was a very, very difficult situation to even decide whether I was going to coach Wheaton Academy, the first time we'd been downstate in this soccer game, or go to the memorial service, for Walter Payton. And I kind of thought about what Walter would say, and what he would do and what he would say to me to do. You have this obligation to the kids. So I did it. We lost the game, but I did tell them about, Walter Payton. And in 2000, when I was running for the Supreme Court, I guess he died in 2000, Doug, right? He died in 2000. I think it was, because I was running for the Supreme Court in 2000, and Mike Singletary was cutting a commercial for me. Mm-hmm. And Mike is a name everybody knows in Chicago too, Hall of Fame linebacker with the Bears. And Mike was one of those guys that attended the Bible study, and also a good friend of Walter's. And he was with Walter on his deathbed. And because when you cut a commercial, there's like a time lag in between production and doing it over and them setting up. So I had time to talk to Mike, and I knew that Mike had been with Walter on his deathbed. And I said to Mike, I said, how what happened? And Mike Singletary looked at me and said, Bob, he got it right. And I knew what he was talking about, but he went further. He said, he trusted Jesus for his salvation on his deathbed. And, when Singletary told me that, it was hard not to go back to me thinking about that day on the railroad ties in 1985, 15 years earlier, with me bearing my tear-soaked eyes, with all the pain that I was experiencing, and him comforting me. And now thinking about, the Lord of the universe, comforting Walter Payton. So I do think the book is about stories. There's a lot about games. There's things about family. There's things about the court, but it is about relationship, right? It's about my relationship with God. It's my relationship with others. It's a manifestation of my relationship with Doug, because we have become friends throughout this. So I'm pretty proud of it. I'm humbled by it, and I'm certainly glad that Doug Feldmann walked into my office. How many years ago was that, Doug?
Yeah, Christmas 2016. So pushing 4 years.
4 years.
That can be how long a book project takes.
And we've become lifelong friends. So it's funny how that all works out, but that's pretty much what the book's about.
And happy, Annie, if anyone has any questions they'd like to ask, I think we'd be happy to answer them now.
Everybody, definitely. So I'm going to give everyone just a moment, because we do have, when you're typing, it might take a little bit of time, but if you have any questions, I am monitoring it on YouTube as well, because I see that we have a couple of people watching over there. So if you'd like to drop any questions you have, either in the comment section or in the Q&A, they'd be happy to answer them. Doesn't look like we have any in Zoom just yet.
They're all getting ready for the debate, the last debate.
All right. Don't see any coming in. Oh, here we go. When did you go to law school? While you were with the Bears?
I did. I went to Notre Dame. I graduated in 1974. And I always said that I intended to go to law school in the city where hopefully I was drafted and played professional football. But you have to remember, you get out of college and you're 21, 22 years old. And I was enjoying being a professional place kicker for the Chicago Bears. And I pretty much procrastinated for 3 years. But still, when I was interviewed, I said I'd want to go to law school. Well, my brother Rick was 3 years behind me at Notre Dame. And when he got out of school, he did go to Loyola Law School. And just before he started, he said, hey, Bud Murdoch, who at that time was the dean of Loyola Law School and had previously been a professor, law professor at the University of Notre Dame, said he told my brother that he wanted me to have breakfast with him. So I went down and I had breakfast with him in the city. And Murdoch said, hey, I keep reading everywhere that you want to go to law school. When are you thinking about starting? It's been 3 years. And maybe there was something about my brother starting law school, but I said, well, maybe this off season. And Murdoch, I guess, knowing better, said to me, well, let's do it this season. And so I started. I went at night during the season, starting in 77, and I went full-time days during the off season. And I got out in 1981. I was technically a day student because I had more hours during the day during the off season than I did at night, but it took the normal night school time frame, which was 4 years. So it's something how that happens. God has plans to prosper us, I guess. So I went I went to law school. I got out in 81. I practiced law out in the western suburbs during the off season. We didn't go to the playoffs all that often, so the off season was longer with the Bears than most. In 1988, I ran for circuit judge. I won. I served 6 years in DuPage County, hearing civil jury trials. In 1994, I ran for appellate court justice, which met in Elgin in the 2nd District. I won that race. I served 6 years on the appellate court. And then in 2000, I ran for the Supreme Court and won that race. So I've won 3 races. I spent from 2000 until just February of this year, 2020, so almost 20 years on the Supreme Court, and served as the Chief Justice from 2005 to 2008. So from almost not going to law school and continually put it on the back burner, it certainly seems to have been part of the plan.
If I could speak to that period of procrastination, as you called it, Bob.
Yes.
And I'll give you every chance to refute this story if you like. But if you recall another, if you all recall another person from that rookie class, 1975, Bob Avellini, the Bears quarterback for several years, he claims that Bob Thomas was quite the disco dancer.
Oh, gosh.
When the two would go out. And even so far as Bob Thomas didn't hear Bob Avellini come in the door one day, and then Bob Thomas was practicing his disco moves in full John Travolta attire in front of a full-length mirror. Now, I don't know if that story is true. Bob, you're welcome to refute it as pure rubbish.
I don't remember that with Avellini. I do remember one time with Saturday Night Fever out, Maggie's 3 nieces, when I was dating her, I did put on a white suit and come in and do the disco thing. But
it's the thing to do.
But Avellini has he may have had a tendency there to stretch the truth a little bit. I don't know.
Anyway, want to interject that. But any other questions? Happy to take them.
Feel free to drop those in the Q&A box or in the chat, and then we can answer them.
While we're waiting, thinking about the legal career, I joke around and say I wanted a job where people wouldn't boo anymore, at least in front of me, right, being a judge. But I have to say that running in 1988, certainly it was helpful to have, played with the Bears just 4 years previous as far as name recognition. So it was helpful, but I think it also, was somewhat of a hindrance that once you got on the bench, you had to prove yourself because people were aware and thought of you more as the kicker. So I'm proud of the fact that the attorneys rated me highly and recommended me and found me, highly qualified in that thing through the course of my career. But I also realize, I saw those football cards that Doug threw out there. I get them every week. I get 2 or 3 self-addressed stamped envelopes with, that people want my signature. And I'm just thinking, I'm 68 years old, right? And, you look at the pictures and you see the brown hair and more of it and that type of thing, the mustache from the 70s. And it's just interesting that to me that I certainly had a career that in the judiciary that at least got to the top of the state level. And I go into a jewel and some guy comes up to me and says, "Hey, can I ask you a question?" And I say, "Yeah, go ahead." And he said, "Didn't you used to be Bob Thomas, right?" So they still only think about the Bears. And that's just a testimony to how this is really a Bears town, I guess.
Our next question, did you serve as Chief Justice, and
Thank
what's it
you.
like to live with the other justices? Did you discuss cases all the time, or what did justices do while living together?
That's a great question. You do live together when you're down there. There's 5 terms in Springfield: January, March, May, September, and November. You eat together. Whatever socialization you have, you socialize together. And it's very interesting because sometimes you can tell from the opinions and the dissents that, maybe during conferences that it gets heated at times. And I can tell you that it does get heated at times. And then you have to go up to dinner together. And that's pretty much the unspoken rule, that at dinner or breakfast or lunch or wherever, you don't discuss cases. And when I was on the court, I don't think it's always was that way, but for the 20 years I was there, the court was very collegial. Again, we had disagreements, and they're in writing, but it was very collegial, and I'm appreciative for that because, again, you are living together.
Definitely. Our next question is, are you still a Bears fan?
Yeah, I'm a Bears fan. I have to say that as far, you have to pick and choose. Of course, now we're not going anywhere, right, with the pandemic, and hopefully things get back to normal. But I pretty much, I go to Notre Dame games. A season ticket holder at Notre Dame, so they play on Saturday, and then the Bears are on Sunday. And I don't attend that many Bears games, but yeah, certainly watch them every single week. My wife, Maggie, who is a South Sider, Chicago South Sider, I mean, she's a lot more, when we're watching the game, she's yelling at the TV. She's a big football fan to start with, right? I think you look at former players and they kind of just sit back and watch, right? But the fans are really the fans, and my wife certainly is one of those.
And a follow-up question to that, and what do you think of the team's current success?
Wow. I mean, it's tough, right? I mean, what are they, 4-1, 4-1? 4-1, I think. 5-1?
I think so.
Yeah. I mean, hey, you can't argue with winning, right? And it reminded me a little bit because they have won ugly, but they've won. There's games they could have lost that they ended up winning, but they won. And success tends to breed success, and adversity. So teams that lose, they let winning escape their grasp, and teams that win and have a history and a recollection of winning find a way to win. I mentioned Notre Dame. I remember we won the national championship in 1974. 73 national championship, actually. The game was in January of 74, but the 73 national championship against Alabama. And I still remember Ara Parsegan keeping us motivated by reading articles about how we didn't score enough points or we didn't win big enough. But all of a sudden you're 12-0 and you win a national championship. So here they are at whatever, 5-1. They're feeling pretty good about themselves, and the standings don't show if it was, a fourth quarter effort or if they scored enough points in the third quarter, as they look at it. It's just the wins and losses. Mm-hmm. So I'd much rather win ugly and be 5-1 than I would have a good games you should have won and look pretty and you're 1-5, right? So yeah, I think they're in really good shape. They keep playing this way. They certainly should make the playoffs. And a lot of it at every level has to do with belief. And if you read what they say in the paper and listen to the interviews, they believe in themselves.
Continuing with the Notre Dame theme, I had the pleasure of interviewing many of Bob's ex-teammates for the book. And one of them was Doug Plank, who went to Ohio State. Doug Plank, another member of that 75 draft class. It was so good. And Doug was Bob's roommate with the Bears for several years. And Doug told me his only complaint about Bob as a roommate was he'd want to wake up at like 6 o'clock on Sunday morning, staying in the hotel Saturday night, and watch Notre Dame highlights when Doug was trying to get some sleep. Otherwise, he was a perfect roommate. And this was every week because football teams stay in hotels, typically at home as well on Saturday nights. So they're kept an eye on and kept cloistered. But yeah, that was Doug's only complaint that Bob was.
I don't think this is in the book, Doug, but the complaint I had against Doug was this was in the day before remotes, right, on the TV with those little turnstile for the channels. And he was so hyper that he would sit in front of the TV with his hand on that channel, wouldn't land on any channel for over 30 seconds, right? He had to see everything that was on. So I don't doubt that I said, let's watch the Notre Dame game. It's just whether or not it would stay on that channel very long, you know?
If you remember Doug Plank, you can all imagine him, you know, hectically. He did everything hectically, didn't he?
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you both so much. I'm going to give another minute or so just to see if we have any additional questions, because typing and then YouTube is on a delay. So I want to make sure that everybody that wants to ask a question has an opportunity to.
By the way, everyone, if you go to the publisher is Cornell University Press. If you go to their website, find the book, and the place to enter a code, it's 09FLYER, and flyer in caps, 09FLYER. That will get you 30% off the book. Don't tell anyone. It's me and Bob's our secret for the secret code.
Yeah.
Friends and family. So please feel free to use that. And Annie, I was wondering if people were interested in having the book signed, they could go to my website, dougfeldmanbooks.com, Doug Feldman with 2 N's.
Mhm.
They can email me there, or I was wondering, I hate to put this on you, but if they could leave the book at the library and I could, when I'm back in the area, I could sign, or Bob could sign.
Yeah, we can work something out.
But you and I will stay in touch. But if people go to my website, they can email me directly and we can work that out too. So
Definitely.
Great.
Here's a link to the book. I'm going to head and drop that into the chat. Oops, I did it to all panelists. Let me change that real quick.
So yeah, 09FLYER, FLYER.
Perfect. All right. Thank you both for joining us this evening, and thank you all for attending. We really appreciate everybody.
Thank you, Annie. It was fun. Doug, we'll be talking, I'm sure. Good to see your smiling face.
Thanks, Annie, and thanks everyone, Bob and everyone, for joining us.
Yeah, and thank you for all who joined us.
No problem. Have a good night, everyone.
You
Take
too.
care.
Bye now.